Thank you. All right. Any questions so far? So there is a uh, attendance list that Dr. Stephen wants you to fill up, right? Please. So just to recap or just to review the thing that we have learned so far, I draw this so that it's easier for us, or for you. Maybe you should try at home. Draw this and then try to put all the pieces together in these pictures, right? So so now we start from, well, when you take a meal, again, the same thing. So this is the pancreas, right? In the pancreas, you have what? So you have alpha cell or A cells, right? And beta cell or B cell. And then you have D cell. And then you have E cell. And you have F cell. All right? So now, so what A cell, alpha cell makes? Glucagon. So by the way, that's the password for today, right? And then beta cell produce insulin, obviously. In addition to insulin is produced amylin. And then B cell produce somatostatin. Hey, you're an expert now. Somatostatin. And E cell produce ghrelin when you're hungry, right? And then F cell produce pancreatic polypeptide, right? All right. So insulin, obviously very important. So what is the main target of insulin? Three main target of insulin. So where the insulin go? Where does it go? To the liver first. See, it's very close, right? And this go to the liver. What it does in the liver? Yes. So yes, it very basically asks liver to take up glucose, right? And then convert the glucose into glycogens, right? When you have a lot of glucose, it will be converted into glycogens. And what is the second target of insulin? Muscle, right? I mentioned to you muscle is glucosing as well. So go to the muscle, and then ask the muscle cell to take glucose, all right? And then what is the third one? Adipose tissue, right? Same thing. Try to use glucose as quick as possible, all right? And then in the muscle here, in the muscle, So, well, the insulin goes to the muscle. What does it do there? What specifically insulin, what does insulin do when it reaches to the muscle cell? Say again? I cannot hear you. Produce ATP, not quite. Insulin will bind to the insulin receptor, right? And then, well, in the end, the end product of that reaction or that interaction is to translocate the transporter, GLUT4, all right? So GLUT4 being translocated to the surface of the cell, then GLUT4 would take or to transfer glucose into the cell, all right, GLUT4. So that's the function of insulin here, you know, to express here everything in the slides if you go back, right? And then this one, basically you have cells. This is insulin receptor when insulin bind, and then basically this, well, of course, many steps. You have GLUT4 in the vesicle here and being transported into the membrane. There, well, you take glucose, right? This is GLUT4, right? Once the glucose get in here, what happened here? Glycolysis, right? Glycolysis. So you process it. So you make what from here? ATP, yeah? ATP, right? Glycolysis make ATP. So as I mentioned earlier, you use 2 molecules of ATPs to do glycolysis, but you produce 4. So you gain 2 ATPs in per molecule of glucose in this case, all right? And then now, since we are talking about GLUT4, and of course we have GLUT1, GLUT2, GLUT3, and GLUT4. Where is GLUT1 reside? All of them, you know, they're mostly present in many cells. And how about GLUT2? Kidney and liver. So this is here, GLUT2, kidney has GLUT2, right? And then GLUT4 is in the muscle and adipose tissue. I forgot to draw adipose tissue here, GLUT4. But yesterday we discussed about GLUT4 also present in A cells and B cells. So there, many years ago, a group in Germany found apparently GLUT4 also expressed in A cell and B cell. Even though in general, we know GLUT4 usually in the muscle, right? And also in the adipose tissue. But as I mentioned, you know, all the cells they have the genes, same genes. It's just about when they are transcribed and when they are expressed, right? So what else? And then, well, what kidney is doing here? Why we are talking about kidney in this case? In terms of sugar metabolism and, you know, related to diabetes. Why kidney is important? Any? Because kidneys can recycle glucose. What is involved in that recycling process? SGLT, right? So you have SGLT 1 and SGLT 2, all right? So mostly 90% actually SGLT2 involved in here because this transporter will take glucose back from the urine, put it back into the system, all right? All right, so how about GLUT3? Where is GLUT3? Reside. Where does GLUT3 is? In the brain, yes. So GLUT3 is in the brain, right? So I figure if you have to read all this, it's kind of difficult to connect them. Try to draw a picture like this, and then put all this information, and then you will see the whole big picture. All right. And then of course you can go deeper and deeper, right? Going deep, into the cell, what's going on there, right? And then, so when you eat, all right, what happened actually? What is produced in the intestine? What are produced in the intestine? When you have meal, when you get glucose or fat or lipid, what will be expressed or produced? Say again. Glucagon, like this. Right? And what else? GIP. All right. So this one, basically the one that would go to pancreas, right, to induce the production of insulin, or the production of insulin. When it get into the pancreatic cell or beta cell, would produce cyclic AMP, right? And cyclic AMP can induce the expression of genes that are necessary to make insulin, and then cyclic GMP also can increase calcium uptake, right? And then that calcium concentration, high concentration of calcium ion in the cell will induce the release of insulin. All right. So that's the way how perhaps you need to, study or try to understand all these things. All right. And then GIP, and both of these also influence brain, right? They would send signal to the brain as well, because their function also to make us feel satiety, or satisfied, and feel full. And they also work here to reduce the motility, of the stomach. Well, it's very complex, obviously, but that's what we are, right? But based on this knowledge, right, then nowadays we have this LGLT2 inhibitors as drugs, right? Because we don't want, if you are diabetic, you don't want to recycle your glucose, from urine, right? So the one that is responsible for recycling glucose is this. Of course, in the past, as I mentioned, human beings, we tend to be hungry. When humans need to hunt, they have to walk a long way and then try to find food. They're hungry. That's the reason the body developed that way, to recycle this thing. But nowadays we eat too much, right? We have a lot of sugars in the body. We don't want to recycle. For that reason, we have drugs to inhibit this transporter so that no more recycling. All right. So then, of course, then the sugar will be released. If you think about it, now, what is the main side effect of this type of drugs, do you think? Huh? Hmm? I can Oh, UTI, right. Yes. Sorry. UTI, yes, especially fungal infection. It's not too much bacterial infection, but fungal, because fungi like sugar, right? So that's part of the problem. Well, side effect. All right, you can continue this on and on, until you have everything in the pictures. All right. All right. So, any questions so far? No? Good. So we talked about insulin secretion already, and then insulin action now. So after you have, well, this is insulin. So here's another kind of side question. How many molecules of insulin can bind to the insulin receptor at the same time? You can see 2 alpha subunit. Yeah. So for each of them can bind to the alpha subunit. So theoretically can, 2 molecules of insulin can bind, but I don't know in the reality whether, because of the steric hindrance, maybe only one will bind, but theoretically 2. But once insulin bind to the this insulin receptor, it's called tyrosine kinase receptor. It's a kinase. Maybe you learned already how this signal transduction occur, right? Basically, the phosphorylation, dephosphorylation, right? All these things. So you make this inositol triphosphate, right? And so basically, what you have to remember, the key transcription factor that involved here is this. This is also a kinase, the AKT or PKB. So that's the main player here. And this one would induce the production of protein and also production of all enzyme involved in this processing of glucose. All right. And then the AKT also, but in the case of diabetes or in the case of cell related to sugar, AKT, this is the one that induce or activate the translocation of GLUT4 to the membranes. So GLUT4 need to be transported to the membrane to be able to take glucose in. So that's a very interesting system here, right? You need insulin to tell the cell to open the gate, because otherwise the cell will not actively opening this GLUT4. All right? But when sugar comes, then immediately, the body sends insulin to the cell to tell them to take this GLUT4 out so that glucose can get in. Now, if the receptor is not sensitive to insulin anymore, of course, this thing won't happen. And then you don't have GLUT4 expressed or presented on the cell membrane, and the glucose cannot be taken into the cell. So you can imagine, I mentioned earlier, if somebody has problem with insulin resistant, right? Even though you take a lot of sugar in, but the cell will not get it. All right, the sugar will not get into the cell. So the cell really is starving. Now, when the cell get in, this is in, this example, for example, in liver and also in muscle, and then glucose can be used in two different ways, right? One is to produce ATP, but the second one to produce glycogen as a storage, right? And then this AKT, the reason why this one is also very important, because it's regulate the expression or the activation of this is glycogen synthase, all right? Because this glycogen synthase is enzyme that make glycogen. So this transcription factor also, well, basically is to block this enzyme that deactivate glycogen synthase, kind of indirectly here. But this is a kinase. So glycogen synthase, if it's phosphorylated, that you get glycogen synthase with phosphate group, that is inactive. This one need to be dephosphorylated. Dephosphorylated meaning you remove phosphate from these proteins to make it active. All right. So if you want to understand this part, that's the explanation. Now you have active glycogen synthase that can take UDP glucose to make glycogen. All right. So this is just common glycosyl transferase reaction, really. Okay. Any question here? Nope. So, okay. So like I said here, people, with diabetes, you can take insulin if you cannot produce insulin anymore, but it's useless if you have severe insulin resistance. Yeah. So that's yeah, because if the cell cannot recognize insulin anymore, then it will not take sugar. Another important thing about AKT, again, the same transcription factor AKT is regulate really, well, AKT can inhibit FOXO1. What is FOXO1? FOXO1 is another transcription factor that regulate the body, how, for example, it increase the production of new glucose or gluconeogenesis. FOXO1 also involved in the production of very low density lipoproteins, all right? So in this case, both really when we are hungry, right? So it's produced gluconeogenesis, right? But FOXO1 inhibit PHAR protein, alpha, beta, gamma. This PHAR is very important really for glycolysis, right? Glycolysis. So if you have insulin, you induce AKT, right? This AKT inhibit FOXO1, all right? The result of that, of course, the opposite of this. Does it make sense? The result of insulin production that induce AKT, which will inhibit FOXO1, would completely change this thing, all right? And take a look and then think about it carefully. So PPAR gamma, for example, or PPAR system involved in glycolysis, the use of sugar, right? That's the reason why we have drugs called PPAR gamma agonists, because we want to process sugar when you're diabetes. Does that make sense? Right. So that's the reason why we have that drugs. But FOXO1 inhibit PPAR. All right. That's the reason why, well, yeah, we produce drug, that can induce the process of glycolysis as well as lipogenesis. Yeah. So that's the way how body to process sugar. Now, I mentioned just now that the first organ that is targeted by insulin is liver, right? So this is what happened in the liver, because liver is closest organ to pancreas. And the first is induced insertion of additional GLUT2. As you know, GLUT2 is expressed in liver. So liver then can take sugar in, yeah, GLUT2 here. So this GLUT2, just the same as GLUT4 in the muscle, right? So it's already expressed there, but then by having insulin, insulin will induce the more expression of GLUT2, and then promote glycogenesis and inhibit glycogenolysis. So once sugar is coming, and they will make glycogens in the liver a lot, all right? And then inhibit glycogenolysis, basically inhibit the breakdown of glycogen, right? And then promote glycolysis, right? Processing of sugar to make ATP, and inhibit gluconeogenesis. You know, we discussed about that before, and promote lipogenesis. You know, all this thing that happen here really, you know, basically related to the use of sugar and to prevent body to produce more sugar. And then promote lipogenesis and inhibit fatty acid oxidation or ketogenesis. All right. We have not discussed too much about ketogenesis so far. Do you know what kind of molecule are made? What kind of molecule specifically? Ketone bodies. You know, what kind of molecule? It's acetone. Have you heard? So basically, it makes molecule like this. All right? Or beta hydroxybutyric acid. Molecule like that. Okay? So this is what we call ketone body. So where this thing comes from? Well, this one comes from acetoacetyl-CoA, acetoacetyl, or acetoacetate. All right. So this, you know, have two different ways. Can go through decarboxylation. So if this electron go up and down, and then this one takes one proton, right? You get this because you cut this off. Or simply this ketone being reduced to alcohol. All right? So as easy as that. So where this acetate comes from? This comes from HMG-CoA. Do you know HMG-CoA? Right? So you know HMG, that's great. So HMG-CoA, let me see. So this OH here, CH3 there. HMG-CoA, right? So basically you lose this CoA minus HCO-A, and then you lose what? No, basically you oxidize. This oxidize it was OH. So that's happened. And then where this come from? From 2-acetate, 2-acetyl-CoA. Where acetyl-CoA come from? fat, lipid. Remember? We talk about lipid, fatty acid or OH, fatty acid CoA. So this one, actually, you can cut this into 2 carbon each because it's made from 2 carbons. Then you get acetyl-CoA. So that's the reason why we are talking about lipolysis. So inhibit fatty acid oxidation. Yeah, so basically it's come from lipid. Yeah. And then also promote protein synthesis and inhibit protein degradation. So when you eat, right, of course you make protein. But if you are hungry, then you will break down proteins. Yeah. So and then the next target is skeletal muscle. Okay. Skeletal muscle, we discussed about this several times already. The same thing, right? The insulin will induce the expression of GLUT4, and then the cell will take glucose in. Yeah. And then one possibility, what happens is glycolysis. You make ATP out of it and pyruvates, right? And another possibility is glycogen synthesis, all right? Because you take sugar, you make glycogen, and then you inhibit, the production of acetyl-CoA or lipid hydrolysis. Then you inhibit ketone body formations. Yeah. So that's what happened. And then also you can take amino acid as well to produce more proteins. That's in skeletal muscle. And then the last one is the adipose tissue. The same thing, adipose tissue also express GLUT4, right? But in this case, mostly or mainly making new fatty acid, right? Of course, glycolysis is always important to produce ATP, which is the power, that run everything in the cell. But then making fat is what adipose tissue is doing, right? So that's the reason why people connect between meals or carbs to fat, right? If you eat too much carb, they say, well, you will get, fat. This is true because it's processed that way, right? And then the adipose tissue or the cell can expand because, if you produce, and because they store this lipid droplets here, they store the lipid in there. So the more you produce fatty acid or the more you produce lipid, and of course, the cells expanding. Yeah. So now related to the homeostasis of this, this just to make it easy, don't worry too much about all this thing, then don't even try to memorize them, okay? But just think about this. Start from ATP. When ATP down, what does that mean? You need more energy, right? When the ATP concentration is down in the cell, that's bad, right? So what happened? That's induced glucose uptake. Because ATP down, AMP up, all right? So that's increased the AMP-dependent kinase here, right? So AMP-activated protein kinase. So when AMP up, ATP down, then AMP-activated protein kinase, the enzyme, get overexpressed more. All right. As the result of that, one is increased glucose uptake, which is very natural. Because ATP down, you need more energy, you need more sugar. This is the reason why we tend to suggest to people who are diabetic to do exercise. Because you want to burn this energy, burn ATP, so that it's down, right? And then the cell is kind of triggered or induced to take more sugar from the blood, right? And then what happened then? So when AMP ups, the outcome of that is fatty acid oxidations down, right? And then, oh, sorry, that's wrong. So this AMP up, it will induce this malonyl-CoA decarboxylase, right? This malonyl-CoA decarboxylase actually destroy malonyl-CoA. So what you're seeing here is actually the effect of malonyl-CoA. So when malonyl-CoA is present, right? And of course you will make more fatty acid product. Does that make sense? Malonyl-CoA. Malonyl-CoA, let me draw here. So this is malonyl-CoA, all right? Since malonyl-CoA is important, so this is the acetate form. It's just carboxylated. The reason why it's carboxylated, because during this fatty acid assembly, you need this position to be active. Well, we are talking about deep chemistry here. So that's the reason why because this one, the proton become very acidic, then can easily to form negative ion. All right. And then when you have two, well, you have this. Well, actually, this should be fatty acid synthase here. Fatty acid synthase enzyme attached like this. So this decarboxylation occur, so you get this negative, and this negative will go there. Oh, sorry, I took it back. So this negative will go there, right? And then what you get is you extend, you extend 2 carbon to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, and so on. So, so malonyl-CoA is a precursor of fatty acid, very much. But then when malonyl-CoA is present, fatty acid oxidation reduce because you don't need to make ketone body. All right. So that's the whole process here. But then when AMPK is overexpressed, then you will see, more AMPK will induce this. This one will reduce this. And then the effect is the opposite of this as well. Yeah. All right. So the same thing here, when GLUT4 is induced, and of course glycolysis is induced. Okay. And then, but this MPK inhibit TORC2. That's why gluconeogenesis is not happening. So that's kind of the way how you interpret these figures, a little bit complex. All right, that's about the the process, right? Now, we are talking about, we are going to discuss about diabetes, right? So several different type of diabetes, of course, they are not only one. The first one, type 1 diabetes, as I mentioned previously, type 1 diabetes really occur because of autoimmune destruction of beta cell, right? That's why it usually occur during, in children, if the children develop autoimmune disease. And then beta cell, they do not produce insulins anymore, because then, in other insulin drug like cetragagogue, secretagogue, right? That will not work in this case. All right. So you need to give insulin to the patient. All right. What else important here? So the problem also, when beta cell cannot produce insulin, alpha cell keep producing glucagon. So you can imagine, the patient really cannot really process the sugar, but at the same time, the body keep producing sugar. Right? So that's make it difficult for the patient. And then, because of that, then the body start using fatty acid to run the cell. So that's why you produce a lot of ketone body, as you can see here. This is acidic and produce lactic acid as well. So that's why you get this diabetic ketoacidosis, right? So the acidity coming from this ketone body, because they produce a lot. And then patient must be treated with insulin. And then to check whether the patient still produce insulin or not, usually they only check the C-peptide test. Remember I mentioned briefly about how insulin is made? You have these A chains, B chains, and C chains, right? And C chain produce C-peptides that you can get, you can test using immunoassays. Type 2 diabetes, as you know, occur more in the adults, right? Due to many different reasons. So for example, sedentary lifestyle can cause type 2 diabetes, overweight, smoking, high blood pressure, high fat cholesterol levels, but also genetics. Yeah. Genetic is very important because sometimes nothing much you can do. Even you try to live healthy and so on, you still get it because just genetic. So mostly this happens gradually. So beta cell insulin secretions going down slowly, right? And the severity, of course, different from patient to patient. It's not like type 1. Type 1, once you get it, then you cannot produce insulin anymore. Then you're done. You need to be given, insulin. And the onset is associated with obesity. It's not always, right? But statistically, yes. Physical inactivity, family history, environmental insults, sometimes chemicals can cause problem as well. Patient can manage symptom by lifestyle modification or be treated with medication. Yeah. So now we have type 1.5 diabetes. You know this, right? So this is kind of in between. They looks like type 2, but actually it's involved autoimmune or antibody as well. So, but it's more like slowly progressing. and happen in adults. So it's called latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood. LADA. So actually, within people who are diagnosed as type 2 diabetic patients, maybe about 10% has this. But of course, because we only know, well, they don't show immediately, like acute symptom like type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, the symptom is very clear. Type 2 diabetes is silent, right? But in this case, yeah, you still, persons still operate normally sometimes. But actually, when you check, if you check, there's an immune response, in the system. Another name for this called slow progressing type 1 diabetes. Basically it's type 1, but it's very slow progress. So usually, well, type 2 diabetic patient, they don't really need insulin immediately, right? Because they still can produce insulin. Sometimes even they produce a lot of insulin, but because the cell is not sensitive anymore or resistant to insulin, then still the cell cannot take glucose effectively. But over time, after 10 years perhaps, if they don't really control this thing, then the B cell just burn out, and then they need to take insulin later on. For one type 1.5 diabetic patient, perhaps within 4 years, they need insulin already. So the definition of this really, because it's considered as type 1, but at least within 6 months, they don't need insulin, but usually within 4 years, they will need insulin. So that's make it different from type 2 diabetes patient. But recently, even this kind of situation occur in young people as well. That's why they have a new, terminology called LADI there. So latent autoimmune diabetic in the young, right? So it's not really for the adult anymore, but young people also have this kind of condition. So obviously, I'm sure many of you know this already. Type 1 diabetes, 10% of incidence. Type 2 diabetes, a lot of people have type 2 diabetes, 90%. The onset of symptom, as I mentioned, type 1 diabetes, very quick. Yesterday you are fine, and then, well, quick mean not like overnight, but in a very short period of time, you see the patient get very weak, and all the symptoms of diabetes showed up. Usually, under 20 years old of age. Insulin dependent, yes, for type 1 diabetes, not initially for type 2 diabetic patient. Beta cell destruction, yes, for type 1 diabetes, not type 2 diabetes, at least not initially. What next is familial. Unusual for type 1 diabetes and common in type 2 diabetes. That's what, that genetic thing. What else important here? So, yeah, the antibodies is important. Type 1 diabetes has the antibody that attack your own beta cell, right? And type 2 diabetes, no. And so on. You can read all this thing. All right, let's take 10-minute breaks. We'll come back here at 1.
Yeah.
I really love that. Yeah.
It's usually bad. I don't know if you might have noticed this, but. I won't get it. One.
Yeah.
What? I would like.
Last thing. No.
Hey, what am I supposed to click?
Yeah.
This is Luke's.
Outside the, whatever that day. But on the other hand, you don't have one to be. Yeah, I'm still in. So hard to. I did, I think I'm gonna open that topic, actually, you know, like. Oh, she's fine, she's like. I was like, girl, I'm here, I'm here. Oh. Well, I know. And I was like, I'll say that. I just. So I will. Maybe like. Like a bowl. It's your birthday. Oh. Makeup. Both. Working all hard right now. Power on the day. Downward for your. Hey, so did you hear my answer or? Oh, no, I did both. Oh, okay. That could be good. When is it? It's already. You're just what you look like. Wait, I'm wondering. It's a girl. Dude, I'm gonna keep it. Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Antonio Jensen. Exactly. Oh. I just tried it out. Oh, there's. Yeah.
All right. Let's finish up this. Can we start? All right, the next type of diabetes called gestational diabetes occur when somebody in their pregnancies, right? And all this thing really due to this placenta hormone, right? The placenta hormone. Well, a lot of changes are happening during pregnancy. Once, of course, you need more sugar, for the baby, and that's induced glycogenolysis, So the glycogenolysis, all right, induced glycogenesis, but glycogenesis is dropped because you make less glycogen, but increase production of sugar, all right? And then, so the placenta also produce this kind of growth hormones and so on that induce the replication or the production of beta cells, right? Beta cell, and you produce more insulin, but at the same time, insulin sensitivity drops. So during this pregnancy, really the situation evolved, and over time, building up to the body become less sensitive to glucose, and you produce more insulin. So basically, a lot of insulin, but then the uptake of glucose drop, and then of course we eat, but then the liver also produce glucose more than usual. So that's make diabetes, kind of condition of diabetes in pregnant women. So of course they can change lifestyle, some modification, but then if it's really bad, then they have to take insulin especially if their body cannot compensate that, the severe hyperglycemia. So, and then other diabetes that we know of is really based on mutation. Some, especially children, if they have mutation in any genes involved in the metabolism of sugar, that would lead to diabetes. Well, late childhood especially, and to also early adulthood. This thing can happen, and many different places, right, that can that can cause diabetes or mutation that can cause diabetes. So it's called maturity onset diabetes of the young, or called MODI or MODI. And then depending on what genes has been what gene mutate, then the name is different, right? And MODI 1, 2, 4, 5, and so on. But what you just have to remember is this type of diabetes really occur from single mutation of the genes, all right? So it's not too much related to, like genetic or from parents and so on. This happens spontaneously due to mutation, and then you get, diabetes, right? Sometimes the glucokinase enzyme get mutated, and then the enzyme sugar cannot be phosphorylated anymore. As you know, when you take sugar into the cell, the first thing is phosphorylation occurs, right? So from glucose, so this is the transporter. So you get glucose. So glucose inside the cell, then you will make glucose 6 phosphate. All right. And from glucose 6 phosphate can make to fructose 6 phosphate, depending on the use. So if you want to use the glucose to make glycogen, for example, then this you need to make glucose 1 phosphate. So this is from 6 to 1. It's called, phosphomutase. And then from glucose 1 phosphate, you make UDP glucose, and then from UDP glucose, you make glycogen. All right, so that's one way. Or you convert glucose 6 phosphate to fructose 6 phosphate, and then this all the way to pyruvate. Pyruvate. So what do you call this? What pathway? Glycolysis, right? You make pyruvate and you produce 2 ATP, right? Well, the net product is 2 ATP, right? So phosphorylation is important here. So if, like this, the example here just now, where is it? Glucokinase enzyme get mutated. That means the enzyme cannot phosphorylate this anymore, all right? Then, of course, stop there. Then that's cause problem to the cell, yeah? So, yeah, so this but like I said, you just have to remember there's a variation of a single genes point mutation occur. And from its affect different type of genes in the cell. So this other type of diabetes we call secondary diabetes. It does not involve, it's occur because of something else. For example, when you have a disease, that destroy your beta cell, all right? So like a pancreatitis, for example, that's of course damage the B cell and then make you diabetic. And then drugs that can damage the beta cell as well, right? Or interfere with insulin release or induce insulin resistance, right? So remember, if you prescribe people with statin, right? Atorvastatin, for example, what is one of the kind of side effect? Kind of diabetes, well, increase, blood sugar level. So presumably indirectly, that drug interfere with something in the body. So yeah, so if you take statin, then one possibility is the blood sugar level increase, right? Infection that damage the beta cell, mumps, for example, and ethanol, alcohol, like chronic alcoholic pancreatitis, of course, can cause, the damage of the pancreas and the production of beta cells. All right, this is a summary. As usual, promote action, inhibit action. I highlight here some of these specifically because we'll be talking about medicine anyway in the end. So this is related to that, right? So first, alpha glucosidase, that's inhibit action, meaning if you have good alpha glucosidase will increase sugar, right? Blood level. And then SGL2 will increase sugar, right? Because you reuptake, recycle. ATP dependent channel, also the same. In this case, indirectly, because ATP dependent potassium channel, if it's active, that's stop the secretion of insulin. That's the reason why we have drugs that specifically inhibit this channel. Voltage, this one, the opposite of that, this promote action. So glucagon-like peptide, GLP-1, amylin, insulin, all those things are good for diabetic patients, all right? So for this, we have inhibitors of alpha glucosidase enzyme. We have inhibitor of this. We have DPP4 inhibitors, right? We discussed about where DPP4 is operating. Basically, they would destroy GLP-1 or, GIP. Yeah. Any questions so far? All right. So for the remaining of the time, I will be talking about, let me, go ahead. Thank you. So specifically about insulin, obviously everybody know a lot about insulins, but I want to bring you one further to the next level of your knowledge about insulins. Different kind of insulins, or maybe you already use them or prescribe them, but what are the different and the science behind all those things? All right. So, but before that, let's, as a pharmacist, come on, we need to know some history, about drugs. Yeah. Do you know about history about methyl salicylate or aspirin? Say aspirin. When aspirin was discovered? When was discovered? Say again? 1800s? No. It's late 1800s. Well, there's a really interesting story about aspirin, right? How about quinine? You know quinine? Anti-malarial drugs. Well, of course, it's not being used too much anymore nowadays. Insulin. When was insulin discovered? So, well, about 150 years ago, 140 years ago, right? So all those things, well, I guess only, I'm interested in that kind of stuff, but I think it's fun to understand how, this drugs and medication were found, originally and developed, right? As pharmacists at least, because people look up, basically if they have questions, they would ask you, even during like family, conversation or with friends. Anyway, so about insulins, first of all, diabetes, diabetic condition was first, well, perhaps many people know previous than that, but I think scientifically reported it's about 1886, right? And then people then try to take pancreatic extract of dog and then has it. It has hypoglycemic activity, meaning it can reduce the concentration of blood sugar, and then later on, even they use it into human, use it in humans, using the acidic alcohol solution of insulins. All right. And of course, back then, they only show the concentration drop from 440 to 320. But you can imagine nowadays, you cannot imagine somebody has, glucose level at 440 milligram per deciliter. But back then, no, but they didn't know, what happened. They just feel like, oh, why I feel, weak, or, and I have to go pee so many times. So all those things they realized, but then they didn't know what happened. Anyway, so, but actually the extraction and commercialized in 1923. So that's exactly 100 years ago, really, right? 101 years ago, 1923. And then later on, insulin was crystallized. And you will see many Nobel Prize, people who developed this got Nobel Prize. So to tell you how important it is, because diabetes is pretty much, a silent killer, number one, I guess. And then during that time, protamine, zinc, insulin is being developed. So this guy named Hagedorn realized, actually, because insulin, if you give insulin to people and it stay around 12 hours, it's peak around 6 hours perhaps, and stay around 12 hours. But then when he mixed this with protamine, that's increased or prolong the onset of action, right? Or duration of action, I would say, duration of action. And then another group in Canada found if you mix insulin with zinc, that also prolong the duration of action. So they developed this kind of drugs, they mix insulin and protamine and zinc, and then you get long-acting insulins. But that's without any biotechnology touch. Nowadays, we can make, long-acting insulin without zinc or without all those things because we modify. But of course, you can mix as well, right? But that's requires some kind of genetic modification, right? So the one that has been used for a long time called NPH, this is neutral protamine Hagedorn. Hagedorn is the name of the guy. Protamine, basically they put protamine in there, and then neutral, the pH, that's related to the pH, right? So they make it neutral. And then the sequence of insulin was done by Sanger. You know Sanger, right? Sanger sequencing, nowadays used for DNA. The same guy actually sequenced protein before. And of course, he got Nobel Prize for that. And then the X-ray crystallography, the crystal structures was found. in 1969. That's another Nobel Prize there. And then chromatography, right? The purification technique. So that's very important because then you can purify insulin, become very pure. Because all insulin protein is produced either in the past, people extract insulin directly from animals, like from cow, from pig, then you need to purify them. And even now, if you do it by, using recombinant system, like in bacteria or yeast, you still have to purify them. Otherwise, how can you take insulin out from the mixture of other enzyme or protein in the cell, right? So chromatography technique is very important. The radioimmunoassay for insulin was developed. That's another Nobel Prize. So this thought, the history of insulin is crazy. Nowadays, we have so many different insulin analogs, right? 70 animal insulins, but nobody uses them anymore nowadays, especially in the US. And then 80 chemically modified insulin, and other 150 biosynthetic insulin and so on, right? Mostly it's done by genetic engineering, modifying the sequence of the DNA, and then you transcribe and translate it into protein in the cell. Now, although we can make insulin, we use insulins and so on, as I mentioned previously, it's not as good as our body, it's not even close, right? So the problem is the dosing, right? The body really know how much to produce insulin and to release it depend on the sugar or the food that we intake, all right? In our case, sometimes we have to put it in even before we eat, right? Most of the time, actually, like 30 minutes, and how are you going to dose that? So second, really the timing. In normal case, it's automatic. Once you eat, it's, but if you have to inject it, of course, the timing need to be exactly the same, or, it need to be planned carefully, because otherwise, potentially you get side effect, which is hypoglycemia, right? If you take insulin, but then you don't eat, then you get hypoglycemia, right? Which is very, very dangerous. Suddenly your blood sugar concentration like below 50, that's crazy, And then below 50, usually you don't even conscious, you are not conscious anymore. So, all right, so self-administered insulin on a regularly timed basis, that's perhaps a problem, but well, that's all we can do. And then the amount, right? So as I mentioned, I discussed this already, in the body usually based on the amount of the food that we eat, but it's difficult to do it if you take it from outside. And then about the timing also, and then about the distribution, right? If you put it in subcutaneously, different people maybe, process it differently, and the absorption may be different, all right? So that could be a problem. So yeah, in many cases, sometimes you get this, hypoglycemia, right? This is the last one, just a hint. This is the reason why zinc can prolong insulin activity, because zinc form a oligomers of insulin. So insulin by itself is always present as a dimer, and then in the presence of zinc, it makes hexamer. All right, make hexamer, meaning it become bigger and more difficult to absorb from the skin. When you put subcutaneously insulin into the skin, and then when it's polymerized, of course, it's more difficult to absorb, right? So that's the reason why by adding zinc into that insulin complex, then make it more difficult to be absorbed, and that's prolong the activity of the insulin. So this is the picture of that. So for each of these, you have a dimer of insulin, which is naturally occur. But when you have zinc in the center, you see this, the purple here is proline. Remember that, proline, right? You know proline, right? So proline, so this is the amino acid proline, all right? Contain this 5-member ring, all right? So that's the reason why you see this 5-member ring there. So proline. Right, so this complex make it more difficult to absorb insulin from the skin, which is in turn pretty good for us, so we can maintain insulin activity or action in the body longer, right? So just very quick about nomenclature. Nowadays, of course, we use human insulins. We don't use, you know, porcine insulin anymore, or bovine or beef or cow insulins, right? But human insulin is not directly taken from human, obviously. And it is very interesting. Sometimes you see in the internet, people said about, oh, you know, this insulin is made because it's written human insulins, right? So it's, you know, come from humans. That's not true, right? Well, from human genes, but it's put into a plasmid, you know, and expressed in E. coli and or yeast, all right? So, and then nowadays, because of the purification system is very good, those insulin products only contain about 1 ppm of proinsulin. This is impurities. Remember, proinsulin is the one that has not been modified. All right. Well, I will go back to insulin production method. And then the strength is U100s, meaning you have 100 units per milliliter, right? So 100 units per milliliter, that's the concentration. So that's U100, right? And then you have unmodified form like regular insulins or NPH, like I said just now, neutral protein hagedorns. And then we have a mixture. You can mix NPH with regular one. Why is that? Because if you take insulin, they're very long acting, you have to wait a long time, right? So you put the, you know, even nowadays they put this short acting insulin together with the long acting insulin so that you get quick insulin availability, but at the same time you get this very long acting, all right? Purified insulin, that's historical already now, like extracting from pig and cows, pancreas, right? And then in the past, well, actually, there was a study in Europe. They look at all this insulin product and look at the impurity of proinsulin, which is not bad. Proinsulin just has not been processed and still has some activity, you know. The number is quite different. Sometimes, you know, you get 1,000 ppm and so on. But nowadays, because of the purification systems, very good, it's very low. All right, 1 ppm, the worst thing, you know, maybe 10 ppm and so on. So as I mentioned in here, neither beef or pork insulin are produced in the US nowadays. Yeah? Everything, all recombinant insulins, right? So briefly, we talked about biosynthesis in insulin already, but this is just with, I give, all these amino acid residues that you can see. So this is we call proinsulin. So proinsulin is the protein or polypeptide that is produced originally, but then this need to be processed. 2 or 3 types of enzymes involved, depending on how you see it, maybe 2 types. So it's called endopeptidase, but PC1 and PC2, all right? And then you have this carboxypeptidase E. So basically cut this, right, position. What you get is A chains already cleaved and B chains, the red one, also cleaved here. And because of disulfide bond cross-link here, you get these 2 domain or 2 peptide chains together. Yeah, A chain and B chain. And C chains, the remaining seems like no activity. But as we discussed earlier, if you want to check if somebody still produce insulin or not, this is what you check, in the blood. See if C chain is still there or not. But the one that is active is a combination of A chains and B chains, right? That's the active insulins. So A chain has 21 amino acid, B chain has 30 amino acid, all right? This is very briefly how insulin is made, by recombinant processing. So basically you take the DNA from humans and then you take the plasmid from bacteria and you ligate them together, you get this recombinant DNA. And then you put that recombinant DNA in E. coli or yeast, you express it. There are many techniques that you can use to express the transcription of gene in bacteria or yeast. And then you produce this proinsulins, all right? And then, of course, this is the disulfide bond occur, and then, by hydrolyzing this proinsulin, you get insulin. That is the one that being used, okay? And the 3D structure of insulin, so you have this we have one long helix beta chain, which is in the back actually, and then 2 short helices here, which come from A chains, right? So you have A chains and B chains. Now, so obviously we try to make our life better. If you take regular insulins, then the effect will be really, like maybe take 1 or 2 hours before it's really effective. So then you have to wait, before you eat. Sometimes people cannot wait. Sometimes suddenly something happened, they have to do something else. Then they get hypoglycemia because of that. So you want to have products that you can quickly take and then you can eat, right? So that's why short-acting insulin is very popular, like Lispro, right? And insulin aspart. From the name Lispro, means lysine proline. So there is a reason for that. I will tell you later. But basically, this is more rapid onset of action than regular insulin, and then that would reduce risk of hypoglycemia, right? Because you are, take it right before you eat, and of course more convenient to the patient, all right? But the outcome in terms of the sugar control aspect of it is pretty much the same as regular one, just more convenient, all right? There's another one called glulysin. Right? So why this kind of insulin become suddenly short-acting? This is lispro. It's called lispro because lysine and proline. So remember, I mentioned to you, proline just now involved in binding to zinc, right? Binding to zinc, and then you form this, hexamers, make it long acting, right? Long acting, but well, the general one, yeah, longer. But then by swapping this position, instead of threonine, lysine, proline, you get threonine, proline, lysine. Just by changing that position alone, change the conformation slightly, all right? And then the proline is not there anymore to interact. Does that make sense? Because the position is different. So make it shorter acting analogs, right? And then this insulin aspart means aspartate. So basically they just completely change the proline with aspartic acid. Aspartic acid is another, so this proline, right? So aspartic acid like that, all right? Then suddenly from this non-charged amino acid become this negatively charged amino acid. That's also changed the conformation, make it short acting insulin. All right. Now, how about long acting analogs? The example is glargine. So glargine contains, instead of threonine, in addition to threonine, they put two arginine group there. Arginine group. Arginine group has positive ion. All right. So this arginine group, by adding arginine group, change the PI. You know PI? PI? Who knows PI? This is about protein. You learned this, right? In biochemistry, PI. Isoelectric point, right? When we talk about protein, there's isoelectric point. What is the meaning of isoelectric point? So for example, isoelectric point 5.4 of insulin, what does that mean? Yes? Perfect, correct. So that's the pH where the proteins is uncharged, is neutral, right? But you want, in water solution, you want protein to be charged so that they can be soluble, right? They get ions. If the protein is uncharged, no charge, it will precipitate, will not dissolve very well. So this, if you have PI of insulin 5.4, at pH 5.4, insulin will precipitate at pH 5.4, right? Will precipitate because it's uncharged. Okay, did you follow? Do you follow? But what is the pH in our body? Say, in the muscle, yeah, 6.8 to 7, of course, normally 7 to 7.4. But even if you are tired, your muscle can go down to 6.2 if there's a lot of lactic acid, right? So anyway, so say around 6.8 to 7 in the muscle. Insulin in this pH is soluble or not? Is soluble or not soluble? Is soluble, right? Because it's only not soluble at pH 5.4. So insulin, if you inject, is soluble. That's why it's quickly being absorbed. But if you change the pI to 6.7, so glargine will precipitate in the muscle. Is that bad or good? Well, it's good for the purpose of long acting, right? You let it, well, even though I say not soluble, solubility is relative, all right? Even stone, you can solubilize it if you put tons of water every day, you know, like, well, many compounds is not soluble, but doesn't mean absolute, all right? So to some extent, it's soluble. So in this case, basically they they just put two amino acid residues to change the pI, and that suddenly these analogs will stay longer, all right, in the muscle. So that you get this long-acting activities. And then even the company that produced this play around with the formulation, right? You can see just formulation alone can make a big difference here in terms of long-acting, long-acting of the same compounds, glargine, all right? So this is an old formulation like this, and they can make it really nice, and then they claim this is resemble the normal humans, but that's not true, obviously. So this is just to tell you the arginine effect, why these two arginine make a difference. As I mentioned, let's produce H+, right? That's obviously change the pI of the insulins. Okay, here isoelectric point, all right? So please go back to your biochemistry textbook if you want to know more or want to recall what it is. Another long-acting analog called insulin detamine. So in this case, basically, synthetically modified insulin by adding myristic acid or fatty acid, all right? By adding fatty acid here, that would prolong, this compound or this peptide to stay in the muscle, right? Because fatty acid stay longer in the muscle. And then also bind to the albumin, that's another one as well. If you, inject this into the blood, into the blood system, then will bind to the albumin as well. All right. So you can see the duration is increased. Well, actually, when you inject into the muscle, actually will go to the blood anyway. I'm sorry. So that's the same, yeah. Another example is called insulin degludec, or Tresiba. This is another, the same concept. They put diacid. This is called diacid here because you have carboxylic acid here, you have carboxylic acid here. But the concept pretty much the same. You have, this side chain fatty acid with lysine 29 as the linker there. Sorry, this is lysine 29. The linker is glutamate. No, glutamine. No. What? Glutamate. The N is actually from lysine, right? So this glutamic acid. So the difference between glutamic acid and glutamine So this is glutamic acid, but if you change this to NH2, that's glutamine. But this NH2 here does not come from this, but rather come from the lysine itself. All right, so that's why it's glutamate and lysine. All right, this is kind of the end of the section here. You can see this is regular insulins. The peak is around, maybe 4 minutes, 4 hours, around 4 hours. And then the short-acting insulin, Lispro, Aspart, and glulisine really occur very quickly. And then NPH, a little bit longer, contain protein and zinc, and insulin detimer and then insulin glargine, they are very long acting. So, any question? Well, if not, thank you. So tomorrow we'll talk about the drugs, for tomorrow and Friday, we'll talk about all kind of drugs.